very pleased to be joined by my good friend Michael Sukkar, the Assistant Minister to the Treasurer, Commissioner of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, Susan Pascoe, representatives of the charity sector, and also representatives of the agencies that have done all the hard work in preparing this report. So thank you all for being here today. Now, this report and the other announcement that I'm making in relation to some extra capability for AUSTRAC is part of the government's commitment to the Australian community to keep our economy free from exploitation by serious criminals, organised crime and terrorists. Firstly, today I'm launching joining with Minister Sukkar in launching the first money laundering and terrorism financing risk assessment for Australia's non-profit organisation sector. Now, this is part of a number of reports that we've prepared, this one in conjunction with the ACNC, which highlight the risks associated with different sectors of the Australian economy. Now, the not-for-profit sector in Australia is extraordinarily large and extraordinarily diverse. There's over 250,000 not-for-profit organisations in Australia, and the sector includes some 54,000 registered charities that have a combined annual income of $134 billion. Now, over 8,000 of these charities provide assistance outside of Australia, and they send over $1.5 billion from Australia overseas every year. Many of these not-for-profits provide critical support in conflict zones and also in politically unstable regions of the world. Now, of course, we're talking about very large sums of money, and when we do that, there are always going to be the wrong people who will look to exploit that. This report highlights the issue, and it confirms that Australian charities, like any sector of the economy where large amounts of money have been moved around, are vulnerable to exploitation by the wrong people. They're vulnerable to money laundering, and they're vulnerable to people that would seek to finance terror. And when we're talking about people that would seek to exploit charities and the not-for-profit sector, you really are talking about the lowest of the low. Now, this criminal activity, if it were to occur and when it does occur, has enormous consequences for the community and for our economy. And of course, we're very keen to make sure that it doesn't damage the confidence of the Australian people in their not-for-profit sector. Now, the data that we've gathered for this intelligence assessment has been gathered between 2012 and 2016. During that time, AUSTRAC received almost 250 suspicious matter reports relating to suspected criminal activity and money laundering through Australian not-for-profits, which had a total value of almost $60 million. AUSTRAC has assessed the threat of money laundering within Australia's charity sector as medium. The key threats to the sector are fraud and theft offences, with a lower level of money laundering and tax evasion detected. Of some concern is that this assessment also identified possible links between serious and organised crime groups in Australia with registered charities. In relation to terrorism financing, given the various conflict zones that Australian charities operate in, the assessment is again determined by AUSTRAC to be at medium. In the same period of the assessment between 2012 and 2016, 28 suspicious matter reports relating to terrorism financing involving the not-for-profit sector were received for a total value of over $5.5 million. Not-for-profits and charities must be aware that they are attractive targets for terrorism financing because of their ability to raise money and also camouflage the movement of large amounts of money, particularly to groups or individuals engaged in foreign conflicts. I want to reassure the community at the moment that we have absolutely no evidence that any Australian charity has raised funding for domestic terrorist activities, but we must remain vigilant as the possibility of this occurring does exist. At a government level, we continue to take action to improve the effectiveness in our response to money laundering and terrorism financing threats through domestic, bilateral and international efforts. The government in 2014-15 provided an extra $20 million to AUSTRAC specifically to combat terrorism financing. And as we know, it can be very small amounts of money that can do an enormous amount of damage when we're dealing with terrorism financing. And sadly, Australia has very bitter experience with small amounts of money moving throughout the region, being responsible for the attacks in Indonesia that we saw last decade. Now, with the extra funding that we provided AUSTRAC, this extra $20 million, we've established dedicated teams of analysts that support our national security operations. AUSTRAC has been active here in Australia, but also very importantly, it's been active in the region, working with international colleagues in relation to helping them understand the risk of terror financing from occurring within their jurisdiction as well. Now, in terms of what's happening in the Parliament, I introduced legislation earlier this month that represent the first stage of our efforts to strengthen our Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Act. And this first stage of reforms will be followed by a second stage of reform that deals with regulating parts of the economy or professions within the economy that are currently not as heavily regulated through our anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing efforts. Now, Minister Sukkar in a minute is going to detail some of the action that we're taking in the charity and not-for-profit sector. But before I invite him up here to the lectern, I also wanted to make another important announcement. As part of that $20 million that I detailed, that extra investment that we were making in AUSTRAC's capability, AUSTRAC will use some of this money to dramatically enhance its financial intelligence capability. They've signed a contract for the provision of Palantir Technologies, which provides analytical software to law enforcement all around the world. And that software will be deployed to their intelligence gathering hubs around Australia. And this will be a particularly powerful tool for partner organisations working in the Fintel Alliance, which is the world first public-private sector partnership that I announced with AUSTRAC in March this year. The rollout of this new Palantir software will occur in the first half of 2018, and this will help AUSTRAC to work in conjunction with others in the law enforcement community to make sure that they have appropriate intelligence, real-time intelligence, when they need it. Now, in relation to this not-for-profit risk assessment that I'm pleased to be launching with Minister Sukkar today, can I thank the agencies that were involved in making this assessment a reality? We've systemically gone around parts of the Australian economy to provide information to our partners within the economy about the sorts of risks that they face when they operate. In relation to looking at the not-for-profit and charity sector, this assessment has been done with AUSTRAC, with the ACNC, with the ATO and with other partner agencies. I'd like to thank those agencies, particularly the people represented here today, for the effort that they've put in to help us better understand the risks that we face within the not-for-profit and charity sector around Australia. And I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Minister Sukkar to come up to talk specifically about what's happening with those risks.
Hello everyone, and thanks Michael for that wonderful assessment of the work that's been conducted. Can I also acknowledge Gavin, thank you for the introduction and for the work that on behalf of AUSTRAC, and Susan Pascoe from the ACNC, wonderful that you're here as well. And can I more broadly thank everyone from the not-for-profit sector who is here today. I think it signifies your collective commitment to this important issue and the importance of ensuring that Australians feel as though the integrity of our charities and not-for-profits is such that they can continue to give in the way they have. Minister Keenan outlined that last year Australians donated $11 billion to registered charities, and perhaps even more than that, 3 million Australians gave their time in a voluntary capacity to a charity, and over 8,000 registered charities operate or send funds overseas, with around $1.5 billion being sent offshore each year. And that, of course, is the area which this report has identified as a more significant risk. Can I just reiterate the points of Minister Keenan and commend the ACNC in particular for working so closely with AUSTRAC, as well as representatives from banks, other law enforcement agencies. The ATO has been mentioned today, and I want to thank them too. And if you look at the sheer number of charities and not-for-profits that were the subject of this report, it just shows the enormity of this work, and I've met somebody on the way in who's actually on maternity leave here today, and clearly the amount of work that's gone into this, with over 200,000 charities or associations being involved, is quite incredible. Now, as far as the risk assessment, Minister Keenan highlighted that, yes, there's huge amounts of money. It's a huge sector. It's probably, surprisingly to many Australians, a significant part or size of our economy. And AUSTRAC identified what seems to be a relatively small number, 28 suspicious matters worth around $5.6 million. I want to reiterate, though, notwithstanding that $5.6 million, which in the scheme of $11 billion seems quite small, is extraordinarily damaging to the confidence in the sector. And this is why the work and this report is so important, because it only takes a number of unscrupulous individuals or a very small number of well-meaning charities or not-for-profits who are exploited to undermine the confidence in our sector. The report has also highlighted the importance of AUSTRAC and the ACNC continuing to work together, but also to share real-time data with other government bodies. And that is one area that I think the ACNC in particular is going to put a lot of resources into. How can we harness the capabilities of a range of government organisations who store and maintain huge volumes of data and match those in a sensible way? And I want to commend you, Minister, for the work and your announcement today in that respect. Of course, how do we respond to this? Well, the recommendations in the report are quite vast. They include, obviously, applying the risk assessment framework to charities or not-for-profits who display the sorts of characteristics that have been picked up in this report as being suspect. And that is logical, but following the people, following the types of characteristics. Of course, sharing and accessing that real-time data and trying to apply it in a way that means we, rather than casting the net wide, and we've spoken about the hundreds of thousands of charities and not-for-profits, can target our compliance activities in a more sensible way to ensure that we maximise the resources that we're putting into the risk assessment and basically the work that the ACNC has done already in shutting down or curtailing the activities of unscrupulous operators within the charities and not-for-profit sector. So, Minister, that's all I wanted to say today. Again, can I thank AUSTRAC? Can I thank Susan and everybody at the ACNC for this work? I think the one thing we can take out of it, notwithstanding the medium risk assessments that Minister Keenan spoke about, the sector is in relatively good shape. Yes, there's more work to do, but Australians can be assured that with an effective regulatory regime overseen by the ACNC in conjunction with organisations like AUSTRAC, will ensure that every dollar that Australians donate of their hard-earned to charities and not-for-profits for benevolent activities will reach their ultimate destination. And our job is to ensure that even though 28 and $5.6 million of suspicious activities is very small, that we get that even lower. So thank you for having me here today. Thank you for indulging me. And again, I want to congratulate the ACNC, particularly the agency in which reports to me, for the amazing work that they've done in this report. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ministers. That was fabulous. If you ever need a job, I think you could both be intelligence analysts really well, so it was fantastic. Very, very quickly, just to finish up, this is the first time that AUSTRAC has worked jointly with another agency on a money laundering and terrorism financing risk assessment within Australia. So another first about collaboration. We don't do things on our own, we do them together. And this is essentially with industry in the NPO sense. It's been an important learning experience, and we have both learned from each other. And we're going to continue to work together to undertake a range of activities that Minister Sukkar has mentioned. This milestone research actually follows from the first ever regional risk assessment undertaken in 2016 by AUSTRAC. And we did that together with 5 other nations in the Asia-Pacific region, and that in itself was a collaborative first for us. And that identified terrorism financing risks, of which the NPOs was one sector identified. So again, if you think of how to join the dots, it's not just one thing, it's a collection of activities with partners over time. At the next Counter-Terrorism Financing Summit, to be held in Kuala Lumpur later this year, a further regional risk assessment will be presented on the NPO sector. It will outline a coordinated response, including outreach and education, as well as how we will support higher risk charities and NPOs to strengthen their AML CTF capabilities. Again, let me reinforce that. Working together with people, education, understanding, to help the sector get more resilient, as it were. So this risk assessment will not only assist the not-for-profit sector here in Australia, but it will provide another building block for our regional neighbours to better understand and respond to the money laundering and terrorism financing risks present or being faced throughout the region. And as both ministers have said, money, value, cash knows no borders or boundaries. Therefore, working across the region is a crucial thing to do. It's very important that you see AUSTRAC as both a financial intelligence agency and a regulator. These things are joined at the hip, and Minister Sukkar just mentioned that just earlier. They're joined at the hip. We start with intelligence and take that into the regulatory environment, and that works very, very well for us, and you've probably seen some examples of that over the current year, as it were. And we work with collaborative relationships across a broad spectrum of sectors, again to help harden their AML CTF operations against the threats of criminal exploitation. The NPO sector is especially important here, and I'm so pleased that we're here with Susan and Minister Sukkar. They are not covered by our regulation. They're not covered unless they were doing financial services or gambling or bullying or something like that. And so this has been a voluntary collaborative effort because of the risks we have both seen. And as both ministers have said, 5.6 million might not sound like a lot of money. That will fund an awful lot of lone wolf terrorist activity. The risk assessment will also assist reporting entities such as financial institutions who deal with NPOs as their customers. In the first instance, with the view to protecting the NPOs from broader misuse, and second, to report suspicious activity to AUSTRAC associated with any particular NPO. So a financial institution can learn from this by submitting a suspicious matter report to us to understand that that entity in that sector may be at risk, as it were. What we mean by that then is that we want new controls or they revise existing controls, and we assist and educate to reduce the opportunity for criminal activity. We strongly recognise the important contribution that reporting entities make to the protection of the Australian financial system. And examples that Minister Keenan has mentioned, such as the Fintel Alliance and collaborative risk assessments, continue to demonstrate the value of public and private sector partnerships. And then if you add in other intelligence agencies, the law enforcement community, the Australian Tax Office, and so on, you can see we're building a comprehensive picture together. It will never be perfect, but it will get better and better and better. Very, very finally, the Palantir announcement we're very, very excited about. We are the first financial intelligence agency in the world to introduce it. It's been there in some law enforcement agencies. It's been there in a couple of crime commissions. It's been there in some other intelligence agencies. But we have launched this, and it will be ready next year. We've got a bit of a demonstration of it today, very, very early days. And that will connect our intelligence with other entities' intelligence in a much more holistic way and much, much faster. It is flexible. It sits over the top of a range of data sets. It can pluck data from a range of entities and bring it together very, very fast indeed. And in terms of the government's agenda, it's buy before you build. It's a bought product. You tweak it for your own agency, but it's a bought product, so we haven't spent 5 years building something, as it were. We will have better intelligence work and better targeted reporting and criminal detection. And as I said before, the flow-on benefit for our law enforcement and intelligence partners will be significantly enhanced on this. The Palantir suite can better prioritise, evaluate, assess and disseminate the suspicious matter reports that AUSTRAC receives from our reporting population. And our AUSTRAC staff and Fintel Alliance Operations Hub members, who include government and industry partners, will start using the technology with real-time data reported by industry in the first half of 2018, which is, in my terms, 5 minutes away. I like the model of better, faster, cheaper. Better, is it more wholesome? Is it more accurate? Is the quality up there? Is it fast? Are you spending minutes on something rather than hours, or days on something rather than months? And cheaper, and I have to do some multicultural stereotyping. I really like to look after the Australian taxpayers' money, so if I can get something for a decent price, that's a good thing for government.